Let's now turn our attention to Marx's account of human production. So he calls it human production in the comments on James Mill, but elsewhere he refers to this very same thing as social production or productive activity. And we might also think of it as something like non-alienated labor as a contrast to what we just described last week as alienated labor. And so his account that we're about to go through, his account of human production, it's also his account of social production, of non-alienated labor. This is what non-alienated labor looks like in Marx's view. All right, so he outlines four different ways in which in human production we, quote, affirm ourselves. And I think what he means by that, affirming ourselves, is we fulfill or express our human nature. So human production expresses and fulfills our human nature, our species being, as he also calls it, in four different ways. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the four up there for you very quickly, and then we'll go through them in order in detail. So first, Marx claims that in my production, if I'm engaging in social production and human production, I would have objectified my individuality. Second, in your enjoyment of the product, I would have the enjoyment of having satisfied a human need with my work. Third, I would have been for you the mediator between you and the species. And fourth, in the individual expression of my life, I would have created your expression of your life. Now, all of these are such that on a first glance at them, they're kind of hard to understand. It's not entirely clear what the idea is. And so let's go through them now in order, trying to mine each of these claims for something more understandable. So first, in my production, I would have objectified my individuality. Now, when you first read that, you might think that that's a bad thing. To objectify yourself, typically when we talk that way, that's not a good thing, right? You don't want to be objectified. That's a bad thing. But in this context, it's not at all. In fact, it's a very good thing. It's a good thing about this kind of production that your individuality or your personality, as he also puts it, is objectified. To illustrate how this is working, I'm going to use an example of a tailor, a guy making a shirt. So he's producing a shirt. And if this is human production, so this isn't production under private property, this isn't the kind of thing you would find in capitalistic states or whatever. In human production, this person making their shirt is going to be objectifying their individuality. Well, what does that mean? That means that they control the productive process. They choose how the product will look. They invest, therefore, the product with their own choices. And so when they end up producing the shirt in this example, right, they will see the worker, the person who produced it, or in this case, Marx puts it in the first person, I produced the shirt, right? I will see my own choices in the product. And those choices are reflections of my own personality, my own kind of creative temperament. And so that product, I can see myself in it because I see the choices that I made, my own creativity, my own view of what looks good, and so on. And you can contrast this with the alienated labor that we discussed previously. The person working on an assembly line, they don't get to control the productive process at all. They're given a task. You screw in the screw there. That's it. And innovation, creativity, personality is not called for, right? And so when the car, for example, rolls off the assembly line, the worker doesn't see themselves in it at all because none of their personality or creative decisions are in the product. That's an alienated labor in non-social productive activity, or production under private property, as Marx calls it in the comments on James Mill. And so hopefully that contrast now is clear, right? So in human production, since the worker controls the productive process, they objectify themselves in the product. They can see their own creative decisions in the product. That's the first sense in which we affirm ourselves in human production. Second, Marx claims that in your enjoyment of the product, I would have the enjoyment of having satisfied a human need with my work. So let's get another person in there. There's you. And I've created a shirt. You don't have a shirt, or you need a shirt. And so I make the shirt, and now you're wearing it, and you are happy. Prior to your wearing the shirt, right, you're unhappy. Now you're wearing it, you're happy, and your enjoyment of the product. I enjoy having satisfied this human need that you have. Humans need clothing. I satisfied that with my product. I enjoy that. I enjoy your satisfaction and the fact that I have satisfied a human need, right? And Marx here would want to say that this has nothing to do with money. It's not as though I'm paid for making the shirt. That's not where my enjoyment is coming from. I enjoy having satisfied your need, right? You had a need previous to acquiring my shirt, right? You were miserable or you're unhappy or whatever. You had some desire that needed to be fulfilled, and I fulfilled it, right? That is what I find valuable in my productive activity. That's what I enjoy, just having satisfied that need. And what we're going to see is the next two ways in which we affirm ourselves in human productive activity are going to pick up on this idea. They're just going to kind of elaborate on it. And so the last three ways in which we affirm ourselves in human production are all closely related. Okay, so there's the second way, a little bit more straightforward, I suppose, than the first way. Third, Marx claims, and now it's getting kind of very abstract, or it's very hard to understand. Marx claims that I would have been for you the mediator between you and the species. So I, the producer of the shirt, am the mediator between you, the person who's using the shirt, and the species. Well, what on earth does that mean? That doesn't make much sense at all, or it's hard to make sense of that. So what this third way is focusing on is the person who's using the product. And what he's highlighting here is that the person who's using the product, well, they're a human being. And your species as it's appearing here in this third way, requires that certain needs be met. Because you are this kind of being, because you are a human being, you have certain needs that need to be met. If you were a different kind of being, there would be different needs to be met, right? So the species, Marx would say, if you were a bird or something, right, your species would require that you migrate south in the winter. Or if you were a plant, right, your species would have certain needs. Your nature would impose certain needs on you, such as, you need certain minerals or whatever from the soil. We're not plants. We're not birds. We have certain needs that arise from our human nature, from our species. And for this particular example, it would be something like clothing, protection from the elements. And so your species requires that you be protected from the elements. Well, in my productive activity, I have made a product that helps satisfy that need. And so my product, in as much as it satisfies your human needs, or these needs that come from your human nature, from your species, my product, or me is the way Marx is putting it here, I serve as a kind of mediator or intermediary between you and the species, between you and the satisfaction of these desires that arise from your nature. So you can think of it something like this. Your nature imposes certain desires or certain needs on you. And in the initial situation that we're considering, right, when you don't have the shirt, those needs aren't met. Your nature requires these needs to be met, but they're not met yet. And so there's a kind of distance between you and your nature. I close that distance. I bring you into agreement with your nature. Something like that is Marx's idea. So I am the mediator between you and the species, in as much as I or my productive activity satisfies your human desires, these desires imposed upon you by your species, by your human nature. Right? That's Marx's idea. Lastly, Marx claims, in the individual expression of my life, I would have created for you your expression of your life, or I would have created your expression of your life. In light of what we've been looking at, this is going to be pretty easy to understand. The hardest thing here is understanding what these two things, these two different expressions mean. The individual expression of my life, what exactly is he talking about there? Your expression of your life, what exactly is he talking about there? What are those two things? And I think once we pin that down, it's pretty straightforward to see what Marx is claiming. When he talks about the individual expression of my life, what he's talking about is my productive activity, right? And we can see now, or hopefully we have it in mind now, why that's going to be my productive activity is the expression of my life. Productive activity is what one's species being, what the human species being consists in. And so when you're living your human life, you're expressing your human life. One of the ways in which we do that, or the primary way in which we do that, is through productive activity, right? And so the individual expression of my life in this example would be, making the shirt, producing the shirt. Well, what's your expression of your life? Well, let's get you back on the scene. You're lacking the shirt, and I make the shirt and you wear it now. Your expression of your life refers to your fulfilling of your human desires, right? These desires that your nature, your species being impose upon you. Your expression of your life in this fourth way refers to the fulfilling of your desires. And so in my productive activity, I have created the thing that satisfies or fulfills your human desires, that brings you into agreement with your human nature. I have created, to put it in Marx's phrases, Marx's terms, I've created your expression of your life. More concretely, to use this example, in making a shirt, I satisfied your need for clothing. That's what Marx is saying here, right? Your need for clothing, that's an expression of your life, of your human life. And expression of my life here is the making of the shirt, because that's my productive activity. And so we can see how my productive activity, what Marx is trying to emphasize here, is that my productive activity is kind of intrinsically related to your life. There's this close connection between what I produce and other people, right? And so this is why Marx is going to refer to this kind of thing as social production. I don't make the shirt in order to make a mint of money or anything like that. Money never enters the equation at all, right? If you recall back to the second way in which we affirm ourselves, I enjoy having satisfied a human desire with my productive activity, right? And so there's kind of sociality built into the productive activity from the get-go. I'm not making the shirt for me to satisfy my own needs, or so that I might use you as a means to something else, which is what happens under with production under private property. Now, I want to bring together some of the things that Marx has said about species being, because now we have a pretty clear view of what exactly it's going to be. We find these disparate discussions brief discussions of species being throughout Marx's corpus. He never wrote a treatise on species being. But let's kind of synthesize some of these discussions, the discussions that we've seen. Now, we know that it's not just human beings that have a species being, but we can talk about the species being of other kinds of creatures, other kinds of organisms. The species being is simply the life activity of an organism. Or you could put it in, Marx never puts it this way, it's kind of like the nature of the organism. Now, the life activity, the species being of human beings, is social productive activity. And we've just seen Marx's account of what that really looks like, how that would really work, right? That's his account of human production. What Marx tends to focus on, however, and what he's really kind of focused on and what we've seen, and our readings are actually somewhat kind of skewed. I have deliberately chosen the readings to highlight all this stuff about species being to give us as clear a picture as possible of what the preferred alternative to capitalism would be, or to these merely politically emancipated states would be, in Marx's view. I've selected pretty much all of the passages where Marx talks about this kind of thing. Whereas the rest of what Marx talks about is going to be kind of criticisms of the currently existing order of capitalistic societies. Now, we've seen some of that too. And so what I want to do is kind of bring together some of these criticisms, but focus on how capitalistic societies relate to species being, to our species being. What we know, or what we've seen from the economic and philosophic manuscripts, is that Marx thinks that we are alienated from our species being within a capitalistic society, or merely politically emancipated state, something like that. And what we saw in the economic and philosophic manuscripts was that we're alienated precisely because we're alienated from our productive activity. And our productive activity, of course, that just is what our species being consists in. And so if we're alienated from our productive activity, well, then of course we're going to be alienated from our species being. Why are we alienated from our productive activity? Well, or why I think that that's true? Because we approach, in a capitalistic society, we approach productive activity as a necessary chore that we would give up in a heartbeat if only we won the lottery, right? Work, you don't want to go to work. You only go to work because they give you money. So you exchange your labor for that money. What you really want is that money so you can go not do anything or whatever, something like that. You certainly don't want to work, right? And so we're alienated from our work. We're alienated from our labor. That's just to say we're alienated from our productive activity, which is just to say we're alienated from our species being. Moreover, within capitalistic societies, our productive activity is not social, right? Capitalistic societies, those are production that happens in capitalistic societies, that's production under private property, as the comments on James Mill calls it. And such production is not social. It's self-interested. I produce in order to satisfy my own desires and interests. And I might produce things that themselves do that, but then I might produce more than what I need or use so that I can go exchange it for other things that I want, right? And so production is self-interested. And so our productive activity, such as it is, it's not social productive activity. Going back to, and so that's all from the comments on James Mill. Going back to on the Jewish question, which was perhaps the most kind of cryptic, terse or brief about what exactly our species being consisted in, or what that meant. But back in on the Jewish question, Marx claims that we're not truly free. We haven't experienced human emancipation, and we won't experience it until we become species beings. Which is this, and what he says in on the Jewish question, we become species being species beings when we engage in social, or we recognize our powers as social powers, I believe is how he puts it. That is to say, we become species beings when we engage in social productive activity, right? And so that's what true freedom, human emancipation, consists in. It consists in this kind of social productive activity that he outlines here in the comments on James Mill.